Hello and welcome back to another Archaeo-Scope. In this series, I don't answer a question. This series is kind of like an inverted questions of doom, and rather than you sending me a question to try and answer to the best of my ability, I put a question out there for you in the form of a video, and together hopefully we discuss, we think about this, we comment below, we debate, and out of this process comes an answer which one of us on our own, certainly myself in this case, would not have necessarily considered. I really am hoping actually for some constructive comments on this one, because today I wasn't planning on making a video. As you can see, I've been getting the office ready for Christmas. I've got other things I need to do this afternoon, and also incidentally I'm really looking forward to this year's Christmas special, but you know, put that to one side. This morning I woke up to an article which I was reading. Well, actually, in fact, my lovely wife shared with me, Mrs. Soup, from the Huffington Post, and it was on her Facebook feed apparently. And this wasn't really an article so much as an observation, really. The Huffington Post were observing, or reporting on their observation, of a Twitter conversation between a prominent UKIP backer, a funder of the UK Independence Party. This party obviously was one of the driving forces behind the Brexit decision earlier this year. And the other person in this conversation was Mary Beard, a revered classical historian, an expert on Roman history in particular. So we have essentially someone involved in political life talking to an expert in her field, and the conversation was, well, it was less than dignified, really. It sort of eventually became really rather bizarre, with him sort of saying, "Oh, you know, I liked watching I, Claudius on TV," and this kind of thing. But essentially, it started with him trying to use the past for political means in the present. Essentially saying, well, the Roman Empire fell because they couldn't deal with immigrants. We got to deal with immigrants, or you know, we will fall, this kind of thing. And that's kind of the gist, really, of why he was saying what he was saying, within 140 characters. And Mary Beard couldn't let that stand. She sort of, you know, replied saying, no, you need to do some reading on this. It's not that simple. And his comment was, you don't have a monopoly on history, and all this kind of thing. And I would have liked to have seen her perhaps point out some specifics as to why perhaps the reality of the situation is a bit more nuanced. In particular, for example, the idea of the sack of Rome being not only not a single event, but also an event which had less and less centrality to it. By the time we get to I think the third sack of Rome by the Goths or whatever, Rome is no longer the capital of the Roman Empire. It ceased to have that status. It would have been nice to have seen some of that stuff sort of pointed out, but it wasn't. Essentially, it boiled down to her saying, "Look, you know, I'm an expert on this. I know what I'm talking about. You need to go away and do some reading." And also, that I suppose that is also a very I can relate to that. I've seen, you know, I know lecturers who do that, who don't want to give you just the answer straight away. They expect you to do some thinking. But I was intrigued by this conversation because yet again it represents the way in which the history has always been used by politics, I guess. Certainly, as I've talked about in a previous video on Brexit and Trump, you know, founding myths and nationhood and all this kind of thing is very important for how we shape political discourse, how we, for example, consider foreign policy, all this kind of thing. But more than that, it really represents something a bit more specific than just like a vague sense of how history relates to the present. It represents, yet again, the rejection of experts and expertise. During the Brexit campaign, there was a guy in this country called Michael Gove. He has been, for example, in the past, the Education Secretary. Well, he famously said this.
I think the people in this country have had enough of experts with organisations from acronyms.
The people of this country have had enough of experts.
From organisations with acronyms saying that they know what is best and getting it consistently wrong.
Because these people,
Which of course horrified me and many other people because, well, what else is an expert for? Why do we train experts? And in a broader sense, what sort of message does that send to children? I was always told, coming up through school, work hard, become an expert in your field, essentially, and yes, okay, you'll be able to make some money, but also, you can contribute to society. It's part of being a good citizen, as it were, is to do your best and therefore become an expert. So there's that, but also there is the sense that somehow those in power now feel the ability and the right to ignore those who are informed, if you see what I mean. And yet that historically has always, ended up in a bad situation. But also, we often see, for example, the myth of King Arthur, for example. Even he relied, even though he was the chosen one who had the sword, and he relied on the best experts that he could find. He relied on knights, who were the best fighters, the wisest, the most noble people he could find. He also relied on people like, for example, Merlin, who was an expert, and even if experts were essentially, it boils down to someone who's in the know in terms of gossip. A leader should rely on expertise, especially in realms which he is not or she is not an expert in order to make the best possible decision moving forward. I hate that phrase, moving forward, but it feels appropriate for the political realm. And so, I think the reason why I'm bringing this to your attention is I'm intrigued as to whether or not actually we are kidding ourselves as experts, especially, for example, archaeologists, but also actually increasingly in other realms. For example, climatologists, psychologists, all sorts of different experts out there who are just being ignored by those in power, education experts, or whether or not we're kidding ourselves that somehow in the past expertise was more highly valued, but also, I suppose, more pressingly, the reason why I'm confused by this and what I'm curious about is whether or not whether or not there should be some sort of pushback against it. Mary Beard did essentially push back against it, and she did it in a way which was very polite. And at the moment, we are seeing, in particular, for example, history being used and abused to further the claims of increasingly bizarre and fringe groups.
The greatest genius when it came to the building of the pyramids, do you know what
those are white people, by the way.
Who are white people?
The Egyptians are not African. I'm sorry.
Do you know where Egypt is?
Yes, it's in North Africa.
Okay, stop. You stop right there. You just said that the Egyptians are not African.
Are white South Africans African?
Wait. Yes, they are African. See, okay, to be African means you come from the continent of Africa. So if you come from the continent of Africa, that's who you are. So that means you're an African. So you do know. Do you also deny science that man originated from Africa, or do you say that's false science?
What are you talking about? I mean, what are you referring to?
I'm talking
science.
Archaeology. I'm talking biology. I'm talking science. In terms of where did man originate? White scientists.
Egypt was an amazing civilization.
No,
it was not created by black Africans. I'm sorry.
It wasn't? Who created it?
People who are white.
So actually on both sides of that discussion, they both referred to history and historical facts to prove their point, but nonetheless it highlights how history is used by the present to push forward a narrative which suits the speaker. And then beyond that, there's another element here, and that is the fact that actually history is the most easily abused of expertise, if you see what I mean, because as the UKIP man said, well, I was taught Roman history in school. People sort of feel as though that nothing. Essentially, it's child level expertise, that somehow history is something that you're taught in school and then you move on to bigger things. Well, actually, I would argue that it's sort of the thin end of the wedge as well, because if you can ignore a historian, if you can ignore an archaeologist, if you can ignore an expert in that field, then you can ignore the climatologist because that's just another expert. Then you can ignore the engineer because that's just another expert. Then you can ignore the general because that's just another expert. then you can ignore, and it does get bigger and more scary.
There's a great line from Cicero about there's nothing so absurd that it hasn't been said by some philosopher. And I think suspicion of experts goes back into antiquity, and it's a very healthy thing to have. Experts, soothsayers, astrologers are all in much the same category.
When you start to sort of to fold knowledge, training and expertise in with somehow the idea that you know better, I guess, and also that someone with expertise somehow has some fringe opinion which is, unprovable and has not been elected, and I have a mandate to be stupid and ignore expertise. I suppose, yeah, I'm bringing it to your attention because it concerns me, and I wonder what our response should be. Whether or not there should be a more pointed response in terms of experts really pushing back against this notion, really highlighting the cognitive dissonance when society tells you to value education but then doesn't value those who are educated. And really actually pushing back against these issues right now, because actually they're more and more dangerous for us as a species. Never mind migration problems and economic problems, but I say the climatology problems. Recently, the UN suggested that we may only have about 60 harvests left before essentially the world as we know it has to change. And whether that means mass starvation or whether it means that we actually experts come up with new ways of solving problems when it comes to feeding people, well, a question has to be answered there. So it's ironic. We seem to need that. We need experts more than ever before, and yet in public life, experts are being ignored right, left, and centre. And I would argue that the ignoring of and the challenging of a classical historian really represents that sort of thin end of the wedge, this sort of very public attempt to dress down someone who is a total expert in her field and who has every right to say, well, no, you should do a bit more research. This seems very dangerous, and I'm not quite sure. I'm not quite sure what my response should be, or what our response should be as people who are interested in the past or who are experts in other fields. And also, as well, to be honest, I'm not quite sure what the public's response should be. And whether or not actually there should be more of a pushback from the public saying, well, actually, my son is in uni and he wants to be a Roman historian, and even he knows that actually it's not that simple. And, because, I don't know. That's the whole point of this series. I don't have the answer. But I do have a lot of concerns, and I simply had to get them out of me this morning and share them with you guys. I don't know. Try and put me at ease if you can, but also as well, actually, feel free to challenge the premise. In fact, is this nothing to worry about? Is this some form of democracy where actually everyone's opinion is equally valid? Is it? I don't necessarily think so, but is it? Feel free to do that as well. Anyway, whatever you do, comment below. Keep it clean, keep it civil, and I look forward to seeing where this conversation goes, because right now it's just happening in my head, and it's a scary, causality that sort of is projected out from the beginning of politicians ignoring experts across the board. Anyway, guys, as ever, whatever you get up to, do take care. Do try to enjoy the season. I'm certainly trying my best to get into the Christmas spirit. And I suppose, as ever, bye-bye.